So we said that there are three reasons. It's about where we focus. Focus creates reality. It's about happiness is not just the negation of unhappiness. The third reason why positive psychology is important is because positive psychology and the areas that we study and, more importantly, apply within the field of positive psychology do not just take us from the zero to the positive. They also help us deal with the negative. They help us deal with anxiety and depression and painful experiences and emotions. When we cultivate the positive, we're essentially focusing on prevention. Let me explain. What has been found over the last 10 years and a little bit longer is that the most effective way of actually dealing with the rising levels of depression in our culture, with individual depression or anxiety, is actually not to focus on the depression and anxiety directly, but that is important as well. It was found that the most effective way of dealing with this phenomenon was actually to cultivate the positive, to cultivate personal strength, to cultivate and identify one's passions, to ask a question such as, what is meaningful to me in my life? What's my purpose? Why am I here? What do I really, really want to do once I graduate? People who ask these questions and spend time on these questions are much more likely to begin a quest that is not devoid of the painful emotions. No quest is. But a quest that is more enjoyable, more pleasurable, more meaningful, and also more successful, as it turns out. But more importantly, more successful in what I call the ultimate currency, which I think is the currency of happiness and well-being. The reason is because there are two different approaches to dealing with illness. One, the positive psychological approach, is that the illness is the absence of health, as opposed to health is the absence of illness. I mean, think about the disease model. The disease model is we're sick because we're ill, and did you listen to that? We're sick because we're ill. That was very profound. You should think about it for a while here. I'll let it time just to marinate a little bit so that you can... Let me start that again. If we take away the illness, then we become healthy. That's the model, the conventional model. Take away the illness, you become healthy, it's good. The positive psychological model is slightly different. It is, you're ill because you don't have enough health in your life. Because you're not pursuing those things that make you healthy. And what makes you healthy? The things that I spoke about before. Pursuing meaning, purpose, cultivating healthy relationships. And when we don't have these things, that's when illness comes in. Now, the difference between the two models, the model of the health model and the disease model, is more than just semantic. Here is Abraham Maslow talking about neurosis. Neurosis is a falling short of what one could have been, and even one could say of what one should have been. Biologically speaking, that is, if one had grown and developed in an unimpeded way. Human and personal possibilities have been lost. The world has been narrowed, and so has consciousness. Capacities have been inhibited. Let me explain what he means here. What he means is that we're ill because we do not cultivate what we're about enough. We do not become self-actualized. We don't do what we're supposed to do. We diminish ourselves, and that's when we become ill. That's when we're unwell. This is very different from the disease model that says, okay, you're unwell, deal with that illness. What he's saying, no, you're unwell, focus on your health, strengthen your health. Because you're ill because you haven't focused enough on your health. He calls that, and I quote, failure of personal growth. That's when we experience neurosis. When we don't cultivate ourselves enough, when we don't cultivate our relationships enough, that's when we fail. And what positive psychology is all about is precisely that. Cultivating personal growth. Working on the positive. And when we work on the positive, on what comes on this side of the graph that you saw up there, on the positive side, when we cultivate these things, it also helps us deal much better with the negative when that arises. I want to quote Marty Seligman, who talks about precisely this idea. In the last decade, psychologists have become concerned with prevention. How can we prevent problems like depression or substance abuse or schizophrenia in young people who are genetically vulnerable or who live in worlds that nurture these problems? How can we prevent murderous schoolyard violence in children who have access to weapons, poor parental supervision, and a mean streak? Now he's asking this question, and the disease model response to this is, we need to help them deal directly with their depression and with their anxiety and with their unhappiness so that we can prevent all these social ills, whether it's violence, whether it's unhappiness. What he's saying here is the following. What we have learned over 50 years is that the disease model does not move us closer to the prevention of these serious problems. Indeed, the major strides in prevention have largely come from a perspective focused on systematically building competency, not correcting weakness. In other words, the health model. Let's work on competencies, let's work on strengths, let's work on relationships, let's help them identify something meaningful in their life, their passion. And that's how we will, over time, also help what comes on the negative side. Health model versus the disease model that goes directly to deal with the disease. Now again, Seligman is not saying to the exclusion of, he's saying also. He continues. We have discovered that there are human strengths that act as buffers against mental illness. Courage, future-mindedness, optimism, interpersonal skill, faith, work ethic, hope, honesty, perseverance, the capacity for flow and insight, to name several. We've shown that learning optimism prevents depression and anxiety in children and adults, roughly halving their incidence over the next 2 years. Similarly, I believe that if we wish to prevent drug abuse in teenagers who grow up in a neighborhood that puts them at risk, that the effective prevention is not remedial. Rather, it consists of identifying and amplifying the strengths that these teens already have. It's exactly what Marva Collins did. Focus on the health and cultivated that. Watered it and shed light on it and realized it. We'll talk about all these ideas throughout the course. What the health model does, this is a theme that will go throughout the course, is cultivate capacity. It cultivates the capacity to deal with the negatives when these arise, whether it's negatives and painful experiences in relationships or in ourselves. What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, let me draw on two analogies. Cultivating capacities is about creating a strong psychological immune system. These are the words of Nathaniel Branden. Psychological immune system. What happens when we have a strong physical immune system? Does it mean that we don't get ill? Of course not. We do. But it means that we get ill less often, and when we do get sick, we recover more promptly. This is exactly what cultivating strength, optimism, sense of purpose, meaning, mindfulness, this is exactly what these characteristics do. They enlarge, transform the way we see, the way we experience the world, enlarge the capacity of the form, and thus we're better able to deal with inevitable difficulties. And there are inevitable difficulties. No life is completely immune to those. So strengthens our immune system. Another analogy that we can use is of an engine. If we have a small engine and we have to pull a car up a steep hill, a difficult hill, the engine is more likely to collapse, to blow up. Whereas if our engine is large, we're much more likely to get up that hill and to do it more gracefully with relative ease. So what we're doing when we cultivate the positive, we're strengthening our, metaphorically speaking, psychological engine, and we're better able to deal with the negative to zero. Not to mention the fact that we're also able to become happier, because happiness does not just come spontaneously when we negate unhappiness. I want to go back to our local village. So remember last time I put up the article by the Crimson. That was, unfortunately, couldn't find a more recent one. That was in 2004. But the situation is rather similar today. And one of the things that the Crimson article says is that we need to put more resources into mental health at Harvard. And that's important, I agree. However, that's only part of the picture. What we also need to do is put the resources in some different places as well, not only, as well. Because it's not just enough to put it in the resources in places that help us deal with our depression and anxiety and unhappiness directly. It is also important to put these resources in places that help us cultivate capacity. The capacity to deal with these difficulties and hardships when they will arise, and they will arise. In other words, there has to be more resources put in places such as helping students identify their passions when they come here, helping students identify their sense of meaning in life, helping students identify what they really want to do, helping students overcome the pull, the external pull that is often there, taking them away from their core, helping them chip away those limitations, those voices, helping them identify who they really are, helping them identify their strengths, and then pursuing those while here at Harvard. All these capabilities, all these skills are skills that are mostly, and I'm not just talking about Harvard, globally, are not taught in schools. And we need to teach them. This is not to say that what is going on at Harvard with the numerous resources that we do have here is not important. It is very important. Just a small example, the Bureau of Study Council. I don't know how many of you have used that resource. I've used it as an undergrad. I still use it. Now I'm doing some work with them. Did some work with them last year, and they're wonderful. And at the same time, we also need to cultivate the positive, to think more of the zero to the positive side of the equation as well. And this is what positive psychology does, and I hope this is what 1504 to some extent will help do. To summarize, the message of the positive psychology movement is to remind our field that it has been deformed. Psychology is not just the study of disease, weakness, and damage. It also is the study of strength and virtue. Treatment is not just fixing what is wrong. It is also building what is right. Psychology is not just about illness or health. It is about work, education, insight, love, growth, and play. And in this quest for what is best, positive psychology does not rely on wishful thinking, self-deception, or hand-waving. Instead, it tries to adapt what is best in the scientific method to the unique problems that human behavior presents in all its complexity. It's about bridging the ivory tower and Main Street in the area which I believe is the most important one and talks to each and every one of us.